Where is the lady who arrived with you? The officer pressed. Moments later, panic spread. I was at Hartsfield Jackson Atlanta International Airport with my daughter-in-law and my grandson, my heart pounding with a joy I hadn't felt in a long time. The announcement that the flight from London had landed still echoed in my head like a bell of happiness. I had been waiting for that moment for a whole year. We were sitting under the huge electronic arrivals board, my fingers wrapped gently around my grandson's small hand. "Look, Mama Odora," little Galani said, eyes wide with excitement. "Daddy's coming home today." Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. On the screen, next to my son's flight number, the word landed lit up in soft green. My chest tightened with emotion. It had been exactly 12 months since I had hugged my son Kwesi, right here in this same airport. He'd left to work overseas, promising it would all be worth it. "I'm just going to the restroom for a moment, Mama," my daughter-in-law, Nia Imani, suddenly said. Her voice sounded more rushed than usual. "I'm feeling a bit off." I nodded distractedly, my gaze already locked on the doors where passengers from international flights would soon appear. I was so focused on imagining my son's face that I barely noticed Nia walking away. About 5 minutes later, a man in a darker, more formal security uniform approached our row of seats. He moved with purpose, scanning the area with sharp, trained eyes. He didn't look like the usual airport staff wandering the terminal. He looked like someone on a very specific mission. He stopped in front of me and lowered his voice. "Ma'am, where is the woman who was with you a moment ago?" I blinked, confused, then automatically pointed toward the corridor. "You mean my daughter-in-law? She just went into the restroom." Before I could say more, his radio crackled. A cold, precise voice cut through the static and the noise of the terminal. "She just exited near Gate G, team. Close off all exits. Surround her position." The officer stiffened. His expression hardened from polite to urgent in a heartbeat. He glanced at me, now with suspicion mixed into his gaze, then turned and moved away quickly. A shiver ran up my spine. I didn't understand what was happening, but fear wrapped itself around my lungs. With trembling fingers, I grabbed my phone and dialed Nia's number. The line rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I tried again. This time, there was no ring at all. Her phone was off. Around us, the atmosphere in the international arrivals area shifted. Men with badges and weapons began appearing from every direction, spreading out through the hall. Passengers stopped chatting and started whispering. Some people backed away, clutching their bags. Others lifted their phones to film. My grandson's small body pressed into my chest as I hugged him tightly. "Mama, what's happening?" he asked, voice wobbling. "I don't know, baby," I whispered, though my own voice didn't sound like mine anymore. And then, in the middle of the confusion and the murmurs, the sliding doors of international arrivals opened again. My son stepped out. There he was, Kwesi, thinner, suntanned, and tired-looking, but smiling with the same warmth that had always lit up our home. He pushed a luggage cart loaded with suitcases, a small gift bag dangling from his hand. His eyes swept the crowd until they found us. The moment he saw us, his whole face brightened. "Mama! Galani!" he called out, abandoning the cart and walking toward us with quick, eager steps. He had taken no more than a few strides, barely 15 feet from us, when 2 plainclothes officers rushed in from either side, grabbing him by the arms. "Are you Kwesi Vance?" one of them asked in an emotionless voice. My son froze, stunned, his smile still half on his lips. "Yes, that's me." "What's going on?" The answer was the dry, metallic sound of handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists. The little gift bag slipped from his hand and burst open on the floor, spilling its contents at his feet. "What are you doing?" I screamed, clutching my crying grandson as I ran toward them. "Let my son go. You've got the wrong person." My son tried to pull away, panic twisting his features. "I haven't done anything," he protested. "What's this about? Why are you arresting me?" A large officer stepped in front of me, blocking my path with one solid arm like a steel bar. His expression was blank, his voice flat. "Mrs. Vance, please remain calm," he said. "Your son is under arrest for involvement in an international fraud and money laundering operation. We need you to come with us to provide a statement." The world around me blurred. The joyful reunion I had dreamed about for months shattered in an instant. I could only watch as they led my son away in handcuffs while cameras flashed and strangers stared. They didn't question me right away. Instead, they took me and my sobbing grandson to a small waiting room somewhere behind the security offices. The walls were bare, the fluorescent light too bright. Everything smelled of disinfectant. My hands shook as I dialed my cousin Vera in Atlanta. "Vera," I choked out when she answered. "Come to the International Terminal, Security Office. They've arrested Kwesi. Please take Galani home. I have to stay." By the time Vera arrived, my grandson was clinging to me like a drowning child to driftwood. "Grandma," he cried, "where are Daddy and Mommy?" Vera gently pried his fingers from my clothes as he screamed and reached back for me. She carried him away in her arms, his cries echoing down the hallway until the automatic doors closed behind them. I remained alone, wrapped in a silence heavier than stone. They drove me to the station in the back of a patrol car. I stared out the window but saw nothing. No buildings, no road, only my son's face as they forced him away from us. At the station, they sat me in a hard plastic chair outside a gray metal door. Behind that door, they said, my son was being questioned. A young female officer brought me a cup of water and a sympathetic look. My hand was so cold I could barely hold the cup. My throat felt scraped raw, but I couldn't drink. I wasn't thirsty for water. I was thirsty for answers. To push back the terror threatening to devour me, I forced myself to think. To rewind everything. I am Odora Vance, a retired literature teacher. My husband died 10 years ago. Since then, my world has narrowed down to my son and my grandson. My boy, a gentle carpenter who loved turning pieces of wood into beautiful furniture, and Nia, my bright, talented daughter-in-law with her growing handicrafts business. I remembered the day my son had told us about the job in London. His eyes were shining with hope. Nia had thrown her arms around his neck and said, "This is perfect for you, baby. Don't worry about us. Mama and I will take care of everything here." And she had. For a year she cooked, went to parent-teacher meetings, looked after me when my back hurt, and treated our home like a kingdom. Now, sitting on that cold plastic chair, another set of memories surfaced. Little details I had pushed aside. Nia whispered on the balcony late at night, thinking I was asleep. The way she talked in a low, business-like tone, saying things like, "package clean," words that hadn't sounded like anything to do with handmade crafts. The expensive bag she bought, as a bonus from a client. The designer sunglasses. The new phone. Every time I questioned her, she had an answer, a smile, a little joke to smooth over my doubts. And then one afternoon, months before all this, I had been watering my geraniums in the hallway outside her home office. The door was slightly open. Her voice carried clearly. "No, you can't use my account," I heard her say coldly. "It's too risky. Use Kwesi's. He's abroad. He won't notice. The money will look cleaner that way." My hand had trembled so hard I almost dropped the watering can. I'd wanted to burst in and demand an explanation. But I didn't. I told myself it was something about taxes or company paperwork that I couldn't understand. I chose peace over truth. As I relived that moment, my stomach twisted. It wasn't that I hadn't seen the signs. It was that I'd refused to see them clearly. Hours passed. My back ached, my legs were numb, but that door in front of me remained closed. The ticking clock on the wall grew louder and louder, a cruel reminder of each minute my son spent alone under suspicion. Finally, the lock clicked. The door opened, but it wasn't my boy who walked through. Instead, a man in his 50s stepped out, dressed in a tailored suit instead of a uniform. He had salt and pepper hair, a serious face, and eyes that had clearly seen far too many ugly truths. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked. I nodded. "I'm Detective Thorne. I'm leading this investigation. Would you come with me, please?" He led me into a small office with a single window and a large wooden desk. On it lay a thick file with a label bearing my son's name, Kwesi Vance. He opened it without ceremony and turned it so I could see. Diagrams, arrows, numbers, bank accounts. My son's name sat in the middle like the center of a web. "In the past 14 months, Detective Thorne began, tapping one of the charts, an account in your son's name has received more than $2 million from 47 different accounts across the US and Europe. That money was then quickly moved into offshore accounts in Panama and the Cayman Islands. The pattern is textbook money laundering." $2 million. I whispered, feeling my heart slam against my ribs. He flipped to another page. "Scanned documents, forms, signatures. All of these transfers and account openings are authorized with your son's signature," he said quietly. "Is this his, ma'am?" He pointed at the signature line. I recognized it instantly. The slanted letters, the particular way he wrote his Q. My throat closed. "It looks like his," I forced out. "But he doesn't know anything about this world. He's a carpenter. He barely understands how banking apps work. He doesn't have that kind of money." My voice broke. "You're making a mistake." Thorne's eyes softened a little, but his tone stayed firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance. The evidence is very strong." I sank back into the chair, feeling completely hollow. "Please," I whispered, "let me talk to my son. Just for a few minutes." He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right. I'll arrange it." They took me down another corridor with barred doors and echoing footsteps. Inside a small windowless room, my son was waiting at a metal table. He looked older, exhausted, his eyes red from crying. When he saw me, he tried to compose himself, but his lips trembled. I sat down and took his hands, cold and clammy, in mine. "Kwesi," I whispered, "tell me honestly. What happened?" He lowered his head, tears pooling in his eyes. "It was Nia, Mama," he said at last, voice hoarse. "She said she needed a business account to import materials for her company. She told me it had to be in my name. Right before I left for London, she met me at a cafe with a stack of papers. 'Sign here, baby. Quick. The lawyer is waiting. If we don't do it today, the shipment won't go through.'" He gave a bitter laugh. I skimmed the pages, but it was all legal jargon. I didn't understand a thing. I trusted her. I signed wherever she pointed. I thought I was helping her grow her business, Mama. I didn't know I was putting a noose around my own neck. His shoulders shook as he lowered his head to the table. I placed my hand gently on his hair. My son's love and trust had been used as weapons against him. He hadn't just signed papers. He'd unknowingly signed up to be the perfect fall guy. At that moment, the door opened again. Detective Thorne stepped back inside, his expression even more severe. "Mrs. Vance, I'm afraid I have an update," he said. "The woman who came with you to the airport, Nia Imani Vance, has been confirmed as a key operator in this fraud network in the southeast. She had a plan to escape in place long before we moved in." The rest of his words sliced through me like ice. "All transactions passed through accounts in your son's name. The planners, the true leaders, are still at large. With the main architect of the scheme on the run, your son, on paper, appears as the central figure. He will be charged with money laundering and complicity in international fraud." My knees almost gave out. I stared at my son, crumbling under the weight of a crime he never truly chose. My boy had become the perfect scapegoat. Before I continue, make sure you're following the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Your support helps these stories of justice and second chances reach more people. The evening after my son's arrest, I walked into our house feeling like a stranger in my own home. The heavy front door creaked open to an emptiness that was almost physical. No cartoons playing on the TV for my grandson. No clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Just silence. On the coffee table, the cardboard sign my grandson had made waited patiently, just like we had. In bright uneven letters, it said, "Welcome home, Daddy." The cheerful colors mocked me. I sat down, clutching my notebook where I had scribbled the names of every law firm I had visited that day. Each one was crossed out with angry strokes. One lawyer had gently refused the case with pity in his eyes. Another had hidden behind a polite smile and a full schedule. A younger one had been brutally direct. "Mrs. Vance, no jury is going to believe an adult signed so many documents without reading them. The paper trail makes your son look like the mastermind. Taking this case would be career suicide." By the time I got home, hope was hanging by a thread. The doorbell rang. I considered ignoring it, but it didn't stop. Someone out there was determined. I forced myself to stand and open the door. On the porch stood a woman in her 40s, simply dressed in jeans and a shirt. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, but what stood out most were her eyes, sharp, observant, and very focused. "Mrs. Odora Vance?" she asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. She held up a badge. "I'm Detective Zuri Banks from the Cybercrimes Unit. I've been following the trail of your daughter-in-law, Nia Imoni, for quite some time." Hearing someone else speak Nia's full name with such authority sent a jolt through me. I stepped aside and invited her in. We sat in the living room, the welcome home sign lying between us like a cruel reminder. Zuri didn't start with accusations or cold interrogation like Detective Thorne. She asked me what my son was like as a person, how he treated his family, what he enjoyed in his work. She asked about his character, not his bank accounts. After listening carefully, she leaned forward. "Mrs. Vance, I've read the file. I've seen cases like this many times. The true leaders of these schemes never use their own names. They choose someone clean, kind, and financially naive to carry the entire burden. Your son fits that profile exactly." Her eyes held mine. "Personally, I don't believe he's the criminal here. But what I believe doesn't matter in court. What matters is evidence. And that's what we still need." For the first time since that horrible day, something warm flickered inside me. Hope, fragile and small. "But how?" I asked. "She's gone. The police say she had everything planned. They can't find her." Detective Zuri stood up and looked around the living room with a calculated glance, as if she could see invisible clues on the walls. "People like Nia," she said quietly, "always think they're smarter than everyone else. They erase emails, destroy phones, disappear accounts. But in the place they feel safest, they get sloppy. There's always something left behind. Especially in their own territory." She turned to me. "While she lived here, did she have a room she guarded more than the others? A space she considered hers alone?" I didn't need to think. Yes. Her home office. She kept it locked. She said she needed silence and privacy to create her designs. Zuri gave a slight nod, a hint of a smile tugging at her mouth. "Then that's where we start." I led her down the hallway, toward the door at the end. Nia's office. The brass knob didn't budge when I tried. "Locked," I said softly. "Just like always." Zuri wasn't surprised. She set her bag on the floor, pulled out a small case, and opened it to reveal delicate metal tools. "Sometimes," she murmured, kneeling down by the lock, "justice requires a little extra skill." The only sounds were the faint metal clicks as she worked. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Then there was a soft, final click. The door eased open. A cold, artificial scent drifted out, expensive air freshener mixed with the smell of new paper. The room was spotless. The walnut desk gleamed without a single fingerprint. The closed laptop rested precisely at the center. Books were arranged by color in perfect rows. Zuri handed me a pair of gloves and slid on her own. "You know how she lived more than I do," she said. Look for anything that doesn't fit her usual pattern. Anything hidden or out of place. We searched in silence. I checked the bookshelves, running gloved fingers along the spines and flipping open random volumes, hoping to find hidden papers or drives, but everything seemed ordinary. Titles on art, design, business. All things that matched her public persona. Zuri methodically examined the desk drawers. The top one held luxury pens and monogrammed notebooks. The next contained neatly organized contracts and invoices, the official face of her company. I moved to a metal filing cabinet. Inside the first drawer, instead of folders, I found leather-bound photo albums. When I opened one, my heart clenched. There were wedding pictures of my son and Nia, two young people glowing with love. Another page showed baby photos of little Galani, tiny and red, cradled in his mother's arms. Had Nia ever truly cared for this family, I wondered, or had it all been part of a carefully built disguise? "Mrs. Vance, come here," Zuri called suddenly. She was crouched by the lowest desk drawer, which appeared almost empty, just a few paper clips rolling around at the bottom. But she wasn't looking at the clips. She was tapping the drawer floor with her fingers, listening. "This doesn't sound right," she murmured. She took out a thin tool, pried gently along the edges, and lifted the bottom panel. Underneath it, hidden in a narrow space, was a small black velvet pouch. My breath caught. Zuri placed it on the desk and slowly tipped it over. Out rolled several cheap, basic mobile phones, the kind sold in corner stores. No internet, no apps, only calls and texts. Next came dozens of SIM cards, each carefully sealed in tiny bags. Written on each bag, in Nia's elegant handwriting, were country names: Germany, France, England, Italy. More and more. Then two identical black notebooks slid out. My gloved hand shook as I opened one. The first page was a neat, handwritten list. Names, ages, countries, long sequences of numbers. Elsa Schmidt, 81, Germany. Jean-Pierre Logan, 79, France. Maria Rossi, 85, Italy. Dozens of elderly people. Zuri read over my shoulder. Her jaw tightened. "These aren't clients," she said grimly. "These are victims. Those numbers are either account details or amounts stolen." She picked up the second notebook. As she opened it, a thick envelope slipped to the floor. I bent to pick it up and slid out a stack of glossy photographs. Not family pictures. Not vacations. Evidence. In one, Nia sat in a luxury hotel lounge, smiling at a group of well-dressed men whose faces radiated danger. Glasses of champagne glittered on the table. In another, she shook hands with a tall man in a black suit. A long scar ran down his right cheek. My mind flashed back to a news report I had watched months before. "A wanted international fraudster," the anchor had said. The scar on his face made him unforgettable. Zuri took the photo and stared at it. Then she flipped through the rest, her eyes growing harder with every image. "This doesn't just tie her to the ring," she said quietly. "This shows she's right in the center of it. Not a little participant. A key player." She carefully sealed the phones, SIM cards, notebooks, and photos into evidence bags. "I need to get these to the lab immediately," she said. "My team will dig into everything. The analysis will take some time, but trust me, we've just found gold." Before leaving, she turned to me, her expression firm. "From this moment on, you must stay calm. Live as normally as possible. And don't tell anyone what we found. Not even family. Your safety comes first." When she left, the room seemed to exhale. I remained there, staring at the space that had once belonged to the woman I treated like a daughter. I straightened the things we had moved, returned the hidden drawer panel, lined the books back up. My hands brushed over the expensive objects, a desk lamp, decorative sculptures, framed certificates, all likely paid for with stolen money from elderly people whose names filled Nia's notebook. Disgust churned in my chest. I stepped out into the front yard to breathe. The air outside was a different world, warm, real, carrying the scent of flowers and distant traffic. My neighbor, Mrs. Opaline Chesterton, stood on her porch, watering purple bougainvillea. She had lived next door for more than 20 years. When she saw me, she hurried over, worry etched into every line of her face. "Lord have mercy," she exclaimed. "I've been trying to reach you all day. I saw the police cars this morning. People are talking. What happened to our boy, to your Kwesi?" Looking at her kind, familiar face, the barrier I'd been struggling to hold up crumbled. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I told her everything, from the airport to the accusations. I left out only one detail: the secret investigation with Zuri. Some things had to stay hidden for now. Mrs. Opaline listened quietly, her hand resting gently on my back. When I finished, she stared into the distance for a long moment, as if rewinding her own memories. "Odora," she finally said in a lower voice, "there's something I should tell you. It might matter." She squeezed my hand. "A couple of weeks ago, I couldn't sleep. I came out on the porch for some air. That's when I saw your daughter-in-law at the gate with a man I'd never seen around here. Tall, well-dressed, and he had a scar on his cheek. A long one. I remember it clearly. My heart started pounding. The man from the photo. The man from the news." "I couldn't hear everything," she went on, "but the night was so quiet, some words floated over. Your daughter-in-law handed him a thick envelope and said, 'The package for Frankfurt.' He nodded and answered something I'll never forget. 'The widow from Detroit is already clean.' At the time, I thought it was strange, but I didn't know what to do with it." "Widow from Detroit, clean," I repeated softly. It was a code, I realized. Clean meant a complete scam. The widow from Detroit was probably one of the elderly victims. I suddenly understood how important this was. A witness. Someone who had seen Nia with the scarred man and heard their words. "Mrs. Opaline," I said, gripping her hand tightly, "would you come with me to the station? If you tell them what you saw, it could help prove that Nia was working with criminals. It could show my son was used." She didn't hesitate. Her eyes shone with determination. "Of course, child. I love that boy like he's my own grandson. I'll do whatever it takes." I rushed inside to grab my car keys. Minutes later, we were both in my car, leaving behind the quiet street that had been our peaceful home for years. As I drove, I tried to call Zuri to tell her about the new witness, but she didn't pick up. She was likely buried in work at the lab. I decided to head straight to the station. It was the right thing to do. We were just turning onto the main avenue when a white truck with no logo shot out from a side street. Its headlights exploded in my face, blinding me. Everything became a white glare. I heard Mrs. Opaline scream my name. Metal shrieked as something slammed into us. Then there was nothing. No sound. No light. Only darkness. A sharp chemical smell dragged me back from the darkness. Disinfectant, strong and bitter. When I forced my eyes open, fluorescent lights burned my vision. I was lying in a hospital bed. A bandage itched on my forehead, and tubes linked my arm to a bag of clear fluid. Detective Zuri stood at my bedside in uniform. Her usual quiet calm was replaced by a heavy seriousness. "You're awake," she said, her voice softer than before. "You have a concussion and some bruises, but you're going to be okay." My first thought wasn't about myself. "Mrs. Opaline," I rasped. My throat felt raw. Was she hurt? Is she? Zuri's silence lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like a year. She looked away, then back at me. "The woman who was with you didn't survive the impact," she said gently. "The truck fled the scene. We're searching for it." The words pierced deeper than any wound the accident had left. Tears blurred my vision. That kind, gentle neighbor who had only wanted to help us, gone. Because she tried to tell the truth. Between sobs, I told Zuri what Mrs. Opaline had shared with me. The scarred man, the envelope, the words about the widow from Detroit being clean. Zuri listened carefully, her jaw clenched tight. "Do you understand now?" she said quietly when I finished. "These people don't just steal. They silence anyone who knows too much. They were watching you, and they saw your neighbor as a threat. This isn't only about your son anymore. It's about every person they hurt, every life they destroyed." She was right. My fear melted into something stronger, anger. The next 2 days in the hospital crept by slowly. A plainclothes officer remained stationed at my door around the clock. Sometimes he stood in silence, sometimes he chatted with the nurses. But his presence was a constant reminder that we were fighting people who had no problem running down a 65-year-old woman in cold blood. Guilt gnawed at me. If I hadn't invited her into the car, if I had called a taxi, if I had gone to the station alone. One afternoon, as those thoughts spiraled, Zuri walked in and saw my expression. "Don't do this to yourself, Mrs. Vance," she said firmly, pulling a chair close to my bed. "They were already targeting her. Maybe they saw her coming to your house. Maybe they tracked her phone. They were planning something sooner or later. The blame belongs only to them, not to you." Her words didn't erase the pain, but they cut through the fog of guilt just enough for me to breathe. While I lay there recovering, Mrs. Opaline's funeral took place. Her son, who lived in another city, called me. I expected anger or blame, but instead he thanked me for being with his mother in her last moments. Through tears, I asked my cousin Vera to send a large wreath in my name. On its ribbon, I wrote, "To a brave neighbor. Justice will come." The day I was discharged, Zuri came herself to pick me up. On the way back, as the city passed by outside the window, she gave me the first real piece of good news. "We found the truck," she said, eyes on the road. "Or rather, we traced it. It was rented under a fake identity, but the driver made a mistake. He paid with a credit card. Even though the card was cloned, the transaction left a trail." Her team had followed that digital footprint to a small internet cafe on the outskirts of Atlanta. Security camera footage showed a man making the online rental. Zuri's team compared his image to the FBI database. "It's a perfect match," she said, and for the first time I heard satisfaction in her tone. "His real name is Darius Scar Mitchell. He works as a muscle for different criminal organizations. Assault, extortion, intimidation. And yes, he's the same man with the scar you saw in the photos." Soon after identifying him, the police raided a cheap motel where Darius was hiding. He didn't resist. Zuri left me at home with instructions not to open the door to anyone I didn't know. Then she went straight back to the station to question him. That night, she called me with the results. "At first, he played dumb," she said. "He claimed it was just a traffic accident. He insisted he didn't know who Nia was. He denied everything." They interrogated him for hours using every official technique, but he kept repeating the same lines. A wall of silence. "Then I decided to try something different," Zuri continued. She told me how she entered the interrogation room with not just a notepad, but with photographs. The victims' photos she had found in Nia's notebook. Smiling elderly faces with their families. Grandparents hugging grandchildren. People whose lives had been turned upside down. She laid them out on the table in front of Darius, one by one, and spoke calmly but with a knife's edge in her words. "This is Mrs. Schmidt," she'd said. "She worked her entire life in Berlin. All her savings vanished because of people like you and your friends. She had to move into a cramped state home." She slid forward another photo. "This is Mr. Dubois from France. He lost everything after he trusted fake customer support that asked for his bank code. He fell into such despair that he didn't survive the shock of what happened." On the phone, I whispered, "Widow, clean." Then Zuri set down a photo of my neighbor, smiling in front of her flowers. "And this is Mrs. Opaline Chesterton. Kind. Helpful. She died after a truck, your truck, hit the car she was in. She had grandchildren waiting for her. She was guilty of only one thing, overhearing words she shouldn't have. Finally, Zuri looked Darius straight in the eye and said, "If you help us, the law will at least consider a reduced sentence for cooperating. If you don't, we'll do everything legally possible to make sure you face the harshest charges we can bring, for her death and for every crime tied to this ring." The silence stretched for a long time. Then the wall cracked. Darius lowered his head and admitted that he had been hired by Nia. At first he claimed he'd only been asked to scare my neighbor, to break into her house, slash her tires, a warning. But when he saw us driving toward the station, he panicked and called Nia. The orders changed. He was told to take stronger action. Then he revealed something no one had expected. Nia keeps something she calls her insurance, he confessed. An external hard drive. Everything is on it. Lists of victims. Voice recordings of scam calls. Transaction routes. And most important, recordings of internal meetings with high-level members of the ring. Zuri's team jumped on that lead. They pulled phone records, traced the last calls between Nia and Darius, and focused on a few recurring, unregistered numbers, burner phones. Following one faint signal, they tracked her last known location, a secluded cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, about an hour north of Atlanta. Zuri called me at dawn. Her voice was steady, but I sensed the underlying tension. "We found her," she said. "We've located the cabin. Don't worry, we're not going in blind. We're setting up properly. And, Mrs. Vance, I think you deserve to see how this ends. If you feel strong enough, I'll send a car for you." A little later, I sat beside her in a mobile command van not far from the cabin. The air inside was cold and buzzing with low voices and the clatter of keyboards. Monitors showed maps, camera feeds, and live data. Zuri handed me a headset. "We've intercepted a call from inside the cabin," she explained. "Listen." Static crackled, then a voice I knew far too well came through. Nia's voice, dry and sharp. "Yes, they picked up Darius," she said with a mocking laugh. "He thought he was untouchable. In the end, they all break. But it doesn't matter. All the accounts are in my husband's name. Poor Kwesi. So in love and so easily fooled. A few fake tears and he signs whatever I put in front of him. Now he's locked up in my place, carrying all the blame." Her words made my fists curl so tight my nails bit into my skin. She continued almost proudly. "Let them search every corner of the state. They won't find me. The hard drive is safe. It's our lifeline." Hearing her call my son a lovesick fool felt like someone had plunged a knife into my chest, twisted it, and left it there. Zuri saw my expression, then turned to the SWAT team leader standing near the rear doors of the van. She gave a single nod. Over the radio, a commanding voice spoke, "All units, move in." On one of the screens, we saw heavily armed officers moving like shadows under the trees, closing in around the cabin. They took positions, then a battering ram crashed into the front door. I heard shouting, furniture breaking, Nia screaming in panicked protest. The whole operation lasted less than a minute. "Target in custody," came the report. External hard drive recovered. Several phones were secured. Area safe. They led Nia out, hands cuffed behind her back. She no longer looked polished and powerful. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes rumpled. She glanced up as they walked her past the command van and our eyes met through the glass. Shock flashed across her face, then turned into a burning hatred. But she said nothing. The officers placed her in a car and drove her away into the early morning light. A few hours later, with the hard drive's contents and the recorded call in which she bragged about using my son, the judge issued the order for Kwesi's release. When the detention center's metal door finally opened, my son stepped out. He had been there only a short time, but it had marked him. He was thinner, with a pale, hollow look. Dark circles carved shadows beneath his eyes. When he saw me, he didn't even try to speak. He just pulled me into a desperate hug and held on as if afraid he would vanish if he let go. On the ride home, he finally whispered, "I can't believe it, Mama. The woman I loved most in this world could do something like this to us. How did I not see it? There was no easy answer. When we reached the house, my cousin Vera was already there with my grandson. The boy sat on the sofa, gloomy and confused, but the moment he saw his father, his face transformed. "Daddy!" he shouted, racing across the room and jumping into his arms. Watching them hold each other, I knew the nightmare wasn't completely over. But a door had opened. A path out of the darkness had appeared. And I also knew something else. Whatever came next, my son would never again be the same trusting man he had been. Life didn't simply return to normal after my son's release. The damage was already done, emotionally, financially, and publicly. But for the first time, we weren't only on the receiving end. Now we had the truth in our hands. "I'm filing for divorce," my son said a few days later, his voice calm but determined. "And I'm going to fight for full custody of my son. He doesn't deserve to grow up with a mother who treats people like disposable tools." Nia didn't object. From prison, she filed no response, no appeal, no sign of wanting to stay in our lives. It was as if she'd cut that chapter out of her story and shut the book. When the day of the criminal trial finally came, the sky over Atlanta was heavy and gray. The courthouse was crowded, journalists, photographers, curious faces lining the corridors. The story of a fraud ring that targeted vulnerable elderly victims and was linked to a suspicious death had gripped the news. I sat in the front row, next to my son and Detective Zuri. My son wore a suit, but prison had carved lines into his face. He stared straight ahead, jaw tense, hands clasped together. The courtroom was large and solemn, with old wooden benches and a high ceiling. The national seal hung on the wall behind the judge's bench, watching over everything like a silent witness. The side door opened, and guards escorted in several defendants, one after another. Among them was Nia, dressed in a gray prison uniform. Her once effortless elegance was gone. Her hair was scraped back, her complexion pale. She walked with her eyes fixed on the floor. A few seats away from her sat Darius Mitchell, the scar along his cheek even more prominent under the courtroom lights. Other accomplices sat beside him, all part of the same poisonous network. When they called my name as the first witness, my legs trembled, but I stood and walked to the stand. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a man with a steady voice and careful questions, guided me through my testimony. He asked about how we had lived with Nia, how she appeared to be an ideal wife and mother, her late-night calls, the expensive luxury items that never quite fit our budget. He asked me to repeat the words I had heard about using my son's account so the money would look cleaner. As I spoke, I saw people in the audience frown, shake their heads, and whisper. The courtroom air filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. Then I described the day Zuri and I opened the secret drawer in the office. The burner phones. The SIM cards are labeled with countries. The notebooks filled with the names of elderly victims. The photos that linked Nia directly to known international scammers. When I finished, the silence in the room felt almost solid. The defense lawyer rose, his tone smooth. "Mrs. Vance," he began, "isn't it true that you might have been biased against your daughter-in-law? That you may have resented her youth, her independence, her success? Isn't it possible that your testimony is colored by a mother's desire to protect her son at any cost?" I looked him right in the eye. This time, my voice didn't shake. "I loved Nia like my own daughter," I said. "I was proud of her work. I defended her whenever anyone criticized her. But no one's imagination could invent dozens of SIM cards connected to different countries. No one's memory could fabricate handwritten lists of elderly people and their bank details. And certainly I didn't invent the photos of her laughing and shaking hands with criminals wanted by international agencies. Those are facts. Whether I like her or not doesn't change that." Murmurs rippled through the room. The lawyer hesitated, then sat down, clearly shaken. One by one, the pieces of evidence gathered by Zuri's team were presented. Recordings of fraudulent calls where elderly victims were tricked into revealing their bank codes. Logs of money moving from their accounts into shell companies. messages between the ring members planning new scams. Then came the audio of the intercepted call at the cabin. The entire courtroom listened as Nia's own voice filled the air. All the accounts are in my husband's name. He'll stay locked up in my place, carrying all the blame. Every word was like another chain snapping. Finally, it was Nia's turn to speak. She walked to the stand and swore in, her shoulders hunched. Everyone expected her to deny everything, to insist she was framed, to pretend she hadn't known what was happening. Instead, she spoke calmly, almost coldly. There was no tremor in her voice. She described how, after a disastrous financial decision, she had fallen deep into debt with dangerous people. She spoke about the fear she felt when they threatened her and her family, and how an opportunity suddenly appeared. Join a fraud scheme in exchange for her debt being erased and a promised life of comfort. At first, she said, staring at a distant point, I told myself I was only doing small things. Helping move money. Signing a few documents. But after each step, there was no way back. Every time I hesitated, they reminded me what could happen to me, and to my family. Then she described how the ring hunted for victims, lonely elderly people on social media, online forums, sweepstake sites. We created fake promotions, she said, fake customer service centers. When someone called thinking they'd won a prize, we asked for the code their bank sent to confirm the award. Once we had that, the technical team drained their accounts in minutes. When the prosecutor asked why she had used her own husband as the official owner of the accounts, she finally looked at us. Her eyes were empty. I needed someone with a clean record, no criminal background, and preferably out of the country. And most of all, someone who would sign whatever I put in front of him. My husband fit all of that. He trusted me completely. I felt my son stiffen beside me. His fists clenched until his knuckles whitened. I placed my hand over his, trying to steady him. The betrayal was already complete. Tearing her apart in that moment wouldn't undo anything. After days of testimony, analysis, and questioning, the judge finally read the verdict. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the rustle of paper when he lifted the documents. For leading a structured fraud operation, for money laundering, for obstructing justice, and for her role in the events that caused the death of Mrs. Opaline Chesterton, Nia Imani Vance was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Darius, for cooperating and revealing crucial information, received a lighter but still severe sentence of 10 years. The other participants were given between 5 and 15 years, depending on their roles. Justice had not brought back the victims' money or resurrected the dead. But it had set a boundary. It had drawn a line and said, "This is not acceptable. This will not go unpunished." As the guards led Nia away, she passed near our row. For a brief moment, she lifted her head and met my son's gaze. In her eyes, I saw no regret, no anger, nothing at all, just a void. In his, there was no love left, no hope of saving a marriage. Only a calm, cold clarity. The chapter was closed. We stepped outside into the afternoon. And for the first time in weeks, the clouds broke. Sunlight slid through, bright enough to make us squint. It felt like the world, in its own quiet way, was acknowledging that a long storm had finally begun to fade. After the trial, the house in Atlanta stopped feeling like a home. It had become a museum of memories, some happy, some unbearably painful. The living room reminded me of the morning they arrested my son. The office down the hallway felt like a scar carved into the walls. One day, as we sat at the kitchen table in silence, my son looked around and said, "We can't stay here, Mama." He was right. We sold the house. With part of the money and my saved pension, we bought a simple small white home in a coastal town in the Carolinas. The windows were framed in sky blue paint, and in the front yard we planted hydrangeas and lavender. From the back, you could hear the ocean on quiet nights, the soft, steady breathing of the sea. There, I decided to fulfill a dream I had always quietly carried. I opened a small bakery. I named it Serenity Sweets, because serenity was the one thing we all needed most after so much chaos. Every morning before dawn, I woke up to knead dough, measure sugar, melt butter, and sprinkle cinnamon. The smell of baking bread and cakes filled the little shop until the first customers arrived. The rhythm of baking, measuring, stirring, waiting, became my therapy. Each loaf felt like proof that something warm and kind could still come out of my hands. Slowly, the bakery became part of the town's daily life. Fishermen stopped by after long nights at sea to buy hot rolls. School kids raced in after class for cookies warm from the oven. Tourists discovered the place and returned every summer. My son found work at a small interior design workshop nearby. The pay wasn't what he might have earned abroad, but his face relaxed more with each passing week. He had something more precious now: time. Every afternoon, he left work early to pick up my grandson from school. Many evenings, I watched them walk down the beach together, their footprints mixing with the waves. Sometimes they built sand castles only to watch them crumble gently under the tide. At home, he read bedtime stories about knights and heroes to his son, teaching him that true strength has more to do with courage and kindness than with money or power. From time to time, my grandson still asked about his mother. "Grandma, where's Mommy? Why doesn't she come back?" he would ask, small face full of confusion. My son never lied to him. He would pull the boy into his arms and answer gently, "Mommy made some very big mistakes, son. Right now she's in a faraway place trying to fix them. But you must remember, whatever happened, you were never the mistake. And here, with me and Grandma, you are loved." One quiet afternoon at the bakery, while I was arranging sweet potato pies on the display, a car pulled up out front. When the door opened, Detective, now Captain, Zuri Banks stepped out, not in uniform but in a simple floral dress. She looked different, lighter, as if she too had finally exhaled after holding her breath for months. "Captain Banks," I said, smiling as I hurried around the counter to embrace her. She laughed. "Just Zuri today, please. I came to see how my favorite family is doing." We sat outside in the small garden behind the shop, under a pergola woven with flowering vines. I served her coffee and a selection of pastries still warm from the oven. She told me about her promotion and how the case had helped expose other branches of the fraud ring. "The newspapers call you a hero," I said. She shook her head. "The real heroine is you, Mrs. Vance. You never gave up on your son. You walked through fear, through doubt, through danger, and you kept going. Without your courage, he might still be behind bars, and Nia might still be out there hurting more people." Before she left, my son came in with my grandson, both sprinkled with sand. The boy ran to show Zuri the seashell he'd found, and she listened as if it were the most important treasure in the world. Watching them all there in that small garden, my son, my grandson, the woman who had fought so hard for us, I felt something unlock in my chest. Gratitude. Not the kind that makes you forget the pain, but the kind that helps you live beyond it. That night, after I had washed the last baking pans and wiped down the counters, I looked through the kitchen window. My son was pushing my grandson on a swing in the yard. Their laughter floated in through the thin glass and mingled with the distant sound of the sea. As I stood there, I thought about everything that had happened. For many years, I believed that living a decent life and loving honestly would be enough to protect the people I cared about. I thought that if I didn't cause harm, harm wouldn't find us. I was wrong. Evil doesn't always come in obvious forms. Sometimes it enters your home with a smile, carrying flowers. Sometimes it sleeps under your roof, sharing your table, kissing your children goodnight. And sometimes, the danger grows while you choose not to see it because seeing it would mean facing conflict, breaking illusions, or losing the peace you cling to. I had heard strange phone calls. I had seen suspicious luxury items. I had overheard words like, "clean money," and "use his account." But I'd turned away. I told myself I was too old to understand. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I chose quiet over truth. My son paid the price for my silence. He almost lost his freedom, his future, and his trust in love because I didn't dare ask hard questions. Now I know something I wish I'd understood sooner. Love doesn't mean closing your eyes. Real love sometimes demands uncomfortable conversations, difficult decisions, and the courage to say, "This doesn't feel right," even when you fear the answer.